Hi, I'm Bill Gaines, host of the Outdoor View, the place where we educate, connect, and learn to protect our outdoor traditions. Today, I have with me a good friend of mine and one of my best hunting buddies, Jim Davies from Jim Davies Forestry. How you doing today, Jim?
I'm doing well, Bill. And yourself?
I'm doing really good. Good. It's gonna be fun to talk to you. I'm looking forward to this.
You know, when we're hunting, we spend so much time chatting, we get little hunting done. So maybe this will work out well.
Yeah, but we have pretty good success hunting together. That will tell you.
Fair, yeah, we're okay.
Yeah, we do all right. Jim, you're a professional forester,
Yep.
right? A lot of our audience probably has no clue what a forester does other than tinkers with forests. What does a forester do?
Well, professional forester manages forestscapes, and in this state, we have to be licensed. This state and Georgia, and I believe there's one other state. But we are licensed then to manage forestscapes. And I don't know, in my background, you'll see an area that's got a controlled burn going on. It's just one of the tools we use to manage forests.
Well, I'll tell you, Jim, you know better than just about anybody. We have had some serious wildfires here in California over the course of the last few recent years. Doesn't a lot of that boil down to forest management and what's going on out there in the landscape?
Yes, it certainly does. And we have been remiss in our duties, I think, in managing our forestscapes. It's been quite a number of years that we haven't been, and you know, people are going to hate to hear this, but we haven't been cutting enough trees. And people think that there are easy solutions, like we'll just add fire to the landscape. Well, in El Dorado County, we burned 220,000 acres this year. About 60% of it was burned dead. About, what was it, 6 or 7 years ago, we burned 100,000 acres in El Dorado County. Most of that burned dead. I don't think that's what we're looking for. The Dixie Fire burned up 1 million acres and took towns out. Of course, our Caldor fire took Grizzly Flats out and many, many homes. We have to get back to the basic principles of caring for the forest, especially the last approximately 30 years. We've done very little to manage our lands in a sustainable way. And we need to get back to that. So what I do as a forester is we try to take the understory down to a point where we can actually put fire back on the landscape, and we take some of the overstory out so that we don't have crown fires that are uncontrollable. So you have a little wimpy fire like the one behind me, and if we can keep fire that way, while we can control it, we can walk it around, and we can maintain the landscape. Now, it takes lots of personnel to do that, lots of bodies. But if we continue with the trajectory we're going, we're simply going to burn up those forests that we love.
You know, I was born and raised in California, and I've lived here for a long time. And when I was young, even up until like 15 years ago or so, I don't remember. We always had forest fires, right? You know, but I don't remember anything like these massive wildfires that we've had the last few years. And I know that the easy go-to for a lot of people is, oh, climate change.
You know, California is just, it's a Mediterranean climate. That's what happens here. We have drought for a minimum of 6 months every year. So it's always dry. It's always been dry. When we had sawmills to take wood to, and when we managed the forest scape, both the Forest Service, the Bureau of Land Management, and on the private lands, we did not have these huge landscape altering fires. And you know, it isn't just the trees that are dying. It's every creature that is involved in this. They just get incinerated. They can't all get away. So we have lost that. The sawmills in El Dorado County, we had 3 relatively major sawmills here. There was Placerville Lumber Company, Michigan California Lumber Company, and Wetzelloviet Lumber Company. And they all managed their own lands, and they purchased Forest Service timber, and the landscape was managed. And fires were an enormous fire. Everybody still talks about it. It was the Ice House fire, 10,500 acres. Well, that's just a spit in the ocean compared to 220,000 or 1,000,000 acres, or last year, several million acres. You know, if we love these forests, then we're going to have to really manage them. And we have lost now the infrastructure, the capability to do something with that. In the Caldor fire burn now, companies like the company that cleaned up the World Trade Center, very similar to that, disaster companies, they're turning big, beautiful logs that could make wonderful timber, build many, many homes, rebuild Kentucky, as it were. They're just turning them into chips and burning them as biofuel. And you know, these trees were 50, 100, 150 years old. And it's not only a horrible waste, it's unnecessary, totally unnecessary. So we've got to get back to the simple basics of forest management. We've tried this. We're going to manage for this species and we're going to manage for that species. We have to manage the entire landscape, the entire watershed, the entire Sierra Nevada ecosystem. And we've just really missed the mark in the last 30 years, especially, and maybe even the last 50. It kind of started in the late 60s, early 70s, and it became the, you know, the greedy industrialists that are slaughtering the trees, and really that isn't what it was at all. So we've destroyed families, we've emptied out mountain towns. To what avail? Because now we're paying the price for that in losing that thing that we claim we love most. So it might be that, you know, the most important thing to fix the landscape is to put in more sawmills, to take better care of the land, for more young people to become forest managers. So these huge fires, Bill, these huge fires, it's real easy to stamp global warming on something and then you walk away and you feel good about yourself. But the fact is that trees grow every day. They grow a little less in a drought year, a little more in a wet year, but they grow every day. And so what has happened now in the last 30 or so years, when management has fallen by the by and the sawmills have gone away because the tie up in supply, is that we've grown, ingrown, and undergrown so much volume of fuel. And as droughts come along, instead of salvaging insect killed timber to get rid of the insects out of the woods, why we allow it to stand, and the wildlife biologist goes, that's great because of the cavity nesters and all of that. And there's some truth to that. Right. But there also is a great deal of truth in when these fires are burning now, they are jumping miles at a time. They aren't going at 3 miles an hour. They're jumping 5 miles at a jump. And even the best fire crews can't handle them. If we can get the forestscape to where it's manageable, and it doesn't all have to be park-like, because we do need dense pockets of timber. But if it's all dense pockets of timber, when it burns, it's a holocaust. It's destructive. It destroys the watershed. Can you imagine 200,000 acres and a heavy rainstorm hits that? That all is going in the creeks. You know, it's a little bit of that probably good for the microbiota, but a lot of it's not. So it fills up the holes in the rivers and the streams and fills up the reservoirs. It's not good for anything. A problem with 100,000 acres of burn and with no place to take the logs is that you can't rehabilitate it. You can't sell those logs. You can't take the profit or the money from those logs and put it back into the landscape. You have to take that out of the general fund or it doesn't get done. I did, as a forester, start out where the number one thing was to produce timber. I also realized that there's a lot more things than just timber out there, especially on the public lands. We don't have to manage them for timber, but we do want to manage them so they survive, because right now they're not surviving. If you think that Okay, in the last less than 10 years, we've burned up a third of the El Dorado National Forest. 1 million acres in Plumas and Lassen. It's a heartbreaking thing.
You've been a forester for what, 50 years, roughly?
I've been a licensed forester for 40 years, or 45 years, and I've been a forester for about 50 years.
You've seen this change more than anybody that I know anyway. Where did this all start, Jim? You mentioned about 30 years ago or so. I mean, this is forest management policy that comes down from the top, right? I mean, doesn't it come down from like the U.S. Forest Service, California's Department of Forestry? I mean, where do these decisions are made as to how we manage our forests?
Well, at one time, the decision was with the property owner. No government can be static. They've always got to create more and more things, and those more and more things affect more and more things. And the regulatory process got to be humongous. So when I started writing timber harvest plans for management, why they were, I think, 2 pages of map. And then now they're hundreds, literally hundreds of pages that take hours and hours. I don't really see a great deal of change in what things are done, but we're really employing a lot of people to look at this paper. What that has done is it's taken the small landowner essentially out of the equation of being able to manage his land. Because if he has 20 or 40 acres or 10 or 5, he can't afford to hire somebody to do the paperwork to put this in and then sell, 5, 10, 20 truckloads of logs. And so those areas become static, they get overgrown, and they can't manage it. In 1992, there was a state change in federal administration. And I'll never forget, one of our local environmentalist came to a forest farm meeting. He said, "We've got you now. In 10 years, 9 out of 10 of you won't be in this business." And he was right. And so we reap what we sow. And here we are, burning up hundreds of thousands of acres, putting towns out of business, and not realizing that our desire to have the forest survive is actually killing it. And that's what's happening.
You mentioned that the sawmills have gone out of business. What drove that?
It's a supply side problem. So if, at one time, approximately, so I worked for one of the then lumber companies that have been in El Dorado County for well over 100 years. And they got half of the timber that they cut in their sawmill off of their private lands. And then they got about a quarter of it from other private landowners. And then they got the remainder of it off of Forest Service managed land. And in the early 90s, the Forest Service went offline, and that supply was no longer available. Then as the private timber restrictions increased, each sawmill tried to vie for logs, and the price of logs went up dramatically for a short period of time until they realized that they're spending more for the log than they're getting for the finished product that they're putting time, money, and manpower into. So most of them decided that they were going to have to shut the doors, and by and large, especially in this particular area, in fact, in most of California, they sold out, and there was one company that was a very, very good competitor. And they managed to pick them up, and as I used to say when I was trying to sell logs, well, we may not like those guys, but they're all we got, so we love them.
Let me ask you this, Jim.
Yeah.
So if you were emperor and you could wave a magic wand, I mean, what needs to change? Do we need laws to change? Do we need regulations to change? What needs to change so that we can get back to where we need to be on forest management?
Somehow we have to change public opinion, and I think those other things will follow. The regulatory process is an absolute nightmare, whether it's federal or state. It is an absolute nightmare. If the state were to sit down and take their 1-inch thick volume of forest practice rules and whittle it down to about 30 pages, it would probably be a lot more useful than it is now. To say best management practices, I think we have a pretty good concept of that, to use best management practices. But the federal government would be even more difficult because you have somebody back in New Hampshire that, this is their forest here also, and they don't know what's going on here. Some of the projects that I'm involved with, we not only have the California Environmental Quality Act to deal with, but we have the National Environmental Policy Act to work with. So these overlapping things are they're more than just a hindrance. They're detrimental to forest management.
Let me ask you this. We've had several years in a row now of catastrophic fires here in California and really throughout the West, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, isn't that changing A, public opinions, and B, isn't that changing the decision makers that are defining regulatory and statutory policy on this? Isn't it like making them take a hard look at what's going on and what they should be doing to change this? Are you getting any help from the legislature or Congress on this at all?
Well, I think so. I think we're getting help. Here we have a Board of Forestry. I think we're getting some help from them. And we're getting lip service from some of the politicians. CAL FIRE has been actually remarkably helpful. They really have. And I don't know whether it's because they realize that their regulatory process is so onerous that they are part of the problem, or whether they're just foresters too, and they know that they can't fight this fight. We have to fight fire by management, and it's got to be able to pay for itself. If you put $2,000 an acre into clearing your property, and you have 160 acres, you have to allow people to make money off of their land. They pay the taxes on it, they have trees growing on it, and if they can make money on it, then they will usually take better care of it. And I'll never forget, we had a sit-down session one time with one of the state foresters, and he said to me, he said, he says, we're not going to allow, your private landowners to log their property and use it for a bank. So every 20 years, they need some money, so they go out and log their property. And to start with, that wasn't his place to say. But I think the important thing is when we were doing something like that, landscape fires were 5,000 to 10,000 acres, not 200,000 to 1,000,000 acres.
Right. Well, I tell you, I don't know how long it's been since you've been in Home Depot or Lowe's, for example, but the price of lumber right now is off the charts. I mean, you would think that every sawmill that could possibly ramp up would be going great guns right now.
We're cutting the lumber in what few sawmills we have. There's no doubt about that. Those sawmills are at their maximum production, and all they're cutting, we're on our heels here. We're cutting dead and dying trees that were burned up. But anyway, we can't even afford to harvest the bug trees. And if we can get the bug trees controlled and salvage those, why, we reduce the speed at which these fires can go.
You said we can't afford to harvest some of these trees now. So is that just the cost? I mean, when you pencil in the taxes that are on it and so on, so the various regulations that drive the demand.
a lot of it's the regulatory process. A lot of it is simply that there are many, many people and many millions of board feet of wood that is going to go to waste, including our public wood, the federal wood. And no money is going to come out of it. It's going to be a cost. And so if I'm going to have a logging company and I'm going to chase around 2,000 acres in a summer to collect trees, it's going to cost me a lot of money. But if I can go to Joe Dokes here, who just had his 40-acre parcel burn up, and I can get almost as many trees in a week off of that as I can here, then I'm going to do that. The sawmill is going to buy it's a commodities business. They're going to buy the cheapest log they can, the highest quality log they can for the lowest amount of money. And that's just the way it works. So that then these other things get left out. And while the companies, the private industrial companies, usually have loggers that do their salvage logging, when they have 20 or 30,000 acres of their own land that gets burned over, they've got to get that wood out. They've got approximately 1.5 to 2.5 years to get it out, and then it's no good.
I live up here in El Dorado County as well, and the fire didn't burn too far. The Caldor fire didn't burn too far from me either, right?
Right.
So I drive through a lot of the burn areas, fairly regularly, and I see this massive timber. And I always think about that. I'm going, that's good wood right there. Why aren't we doing something with it? I mean, so you would think that the decision makers that define policy, you'd think that they'd be thinking, okay, if we, first of all, we got a lot of dead wood out there, we're housing shortage in California, so on and so forth, and we're always trying to jumpstart the economy, everything else. This is a no-brainer. Just lift some of those regulations, even if it's just temporarily, and get people out there and make it worth their while to salvage those logs. Somebody's got to cut those down. They're this tall timber, it burns. Somebody's got to take that down, right? So the state, federal government, state government, somebody's paying for these guys to go in there and do that and just let them lie, right? Right. That's my point.
You are. Yeah.
Getting back to relaxing regulations, let's make some common sense policy decisions here, right? You relax those regulations, and then guys like you and I and other foresters, and you fire up some sawmills. I mean, they'll go in there and do it for you, save the dollars, and then drive the price of lumber down and put more lumber out on the street for new start housing and everything else. Yeah. What am I missing? I don't get it.
It's too simple. Well, starting a sawmill anymore isn't as easy as it was when you went in there with a Model A motor and put a circle saw on it. And another fascinating thing, we have this beautiful lumber, this wonderful stuff that we're so lucky to inherit, and they're willing to help finance bioplants that burn it for fuel. Well, why wouldn't we make lumber out of it and take the waste? So when I worked for Michigan California Lumber Company, they used everything in that tree that came into that sawmill, everything. And if they couldn't make a board out of it, if they couldn't make decorative bark out of it, if they couldn't make a fertilizer amendment out of it, if they couldn't sell the planer mill shavings for particle board, if they couldn't sell the sawdust for fiberboard, whatever, then it went to the boilers, and it made steam, and the steam dried the lumber. So it was this wonderful circle of how things work. And when they were generating steam and not drying lumber, that would go into the power grid. And if they didn't have enough to run their boilers to dry their lumber, then they bought off the power grid. So it was a transfer. When PG&E needed it, they could take it, and when Michelle needed it, they could take it.
More common sense.
It was really made too much sense, didn't it?
I don't get it.
It really did. And in the early 70s, there was, that old growth timber, a lot of it was really, really rotten. And so that you couldn't afford to move it because you couldn't make a product out of it. And it was fascinating that all of a sudden the chip market went up and pulp became very, very valuable. And we were able to take and clean up the woods of these big old rotten logs and haul them all the way to Antioch and make a profit off it. Now that only lasted a few years, and then the pulp market went down. But if we had those markets, there's God only knows what we could do here. All the small trees that now I work with an outfit, we go in and we reduce the ladder fuels to try to keep the fire out of the canopies of the trees. And that stuff, we kind of grind it up. But if we could use that, turn that into a product and it could pay for itself, how much more sense would that make than to have a taxpayer pay for it?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Or the landowner for that matter. You know,
Yeah.
he would have a product he could sell. It's interesting because we always try to reinvent that wheel, and the wheel was actually a pretty good invention. We can't leave our fire escapes with thousands of trees just falling down. Can't afford to do that anymore.
Right. Well, Jim, it's been a pleasure talking to you today. I mean, you're just an absolute wealth of knowledge when it comes to forest management, and you've been around long enough to see the changes, you know, as far as policies and regulations and so forth, and then eventually the impact on the ground. So thank you so much for taking the time to share that with our viewers today.
Well, you're welcome, Bill. Thanks a lot for having me.
And thank you to our viewers for checking into the Outdoor View today. Check us out on Facebook, on our YouTube channel, and on our website at www.theoutdoorview.org.